Mary's first thought was to dive under the bed to hide. But then she remembered a movie that showed where monsters like to lurk most was under a bed. It took her sharp mind but a moment to remember the secret place Mommy had shown her if she ever became scared when she was in the house and a stranger came inside. Or if she saw Daddy at the door. Or for any reason she felt unsafe and needed to hide. Mary had been delighted by the cozy hiding place in Mommy's closet behind her hanging clothes. It was high enough for her to stand up in, and she'd made sure to put in some of her favorite books, one she'd already read but still loved, along with toys and games to keep her occupied. There was a storage container with dried rations like peanuts, dried fruit, potato chips, cookies and health bars, amongst other things, as well as lots of bottled water that would keep her fed and watered for up to 5 days, according to Mommy. And in the corner was a bucket with a twist lid she could use for a toilet with a few toilet rolls stacked beside it. There was even an old mobile phone with a charger that had a plug Mommy had also installed. Mommy's personal number, work number and the emergency number for the sheriff and ambulance were the only numbers on the phone. Best of all was the little door into the hiding place that locked from the inside so no one could get in. Mommy had spent a long time making sure Mary could work the lock easily. From the outside, the little door was practically invisible, as it was made from the same white paneling as the closet wall and was fitted together seamlessly. There were very interesting marks carved and painted black on the inside of the door and the walls, and when she asked Mommy what they were, she told her that they were there to keep her safe. Mary had no reason to ask her what that meant exactly, because at her age she trusted and loved her Mommy and believed everything she said, so she just accepted it. A sudden creak on the staircase had Mary rushing towards the closet and flinging open the doors. Once she was inside, she quickly pulled the doors closed behind her before crawling behind Mommy's long dresses and over her shoes, being careful not to disturb them like Mommy had shown her, and reached for a particular panel, which when pushed would click and open the small door. Mary heard footsteps approaching the bedroom door, and a scary, raspy noise, like someone struggling to breathe. Panic started setting in and tears rolled down her cheeks. She crawled into the dark space, and just as she turned around to pull the door closed, the thing came into the room. Mary could have sworn she heard a long, wet sniff, like when she had a bad cold and she had to keep the snot inside her nose so it didn't run out and slime her face. She almost let out a terrified whimper as the lock engaged and she quietly slid the 2 bolts into place. Backing up onto the small mattress Mommy had put there for her, she hugged her knees to her chest and her wild eyes stared at the little door. Mary couldn't hear the creature moving around the bedroom, but it was like she could sense exactly where it was, which was weird. It was standing at the bedroom window looking out. Then it moved to the bed and pulled the coverings off and dropped them onto the floor. Next, the tall thing bent down and looked under the bed, and Mary sighed with relief, her breath shaky and ragged. She hugged her knees tighter when she sensed it moving towards her, and the distinct sound of the squeaking closet doors forced her to bite down on her bottom lip to stop from crying out loud and giving away her hiding place. Her eyes widened when the markings on the doors and the walls suddenly started glowing blue. But strangely, they didn't light up the space like the light of a lamp. The hiding place was sound and light-proof, according to Mommy, so even if someone looked directly at the door from the outside, they wouldn't see any light peeping in through the cracks. Mommy had cleverly put a rubber seal all the way around the door frame to keep the light in. The longer Mary stared at the glowing shapes, the more familiar they became, as though she should know what they meant but couldn't remember. like when a word was stuck on the tip of your tongue. Mary heard another wet sniff and a huff, and she wrinkled her nose when a horrible stink reached her nostrils. It smelled like wet earth and compost, and she pinched her nose and breathed through her mouth. But then she tasted it on her tongue and nearly gagged. Mary did her best to remain as still as possible and waited to see what would happen next. She didn't want to think about Scruffy. It hurt her heart too much. Only when the closet doors creaked again and she sensed the creature move away and out of the room did she dare relax, and she fell over onto her side, sweating and panting. The glow from the markings grew dim, then faded away altogether, and Mary wondered again what they really were. They reminded her of magic and fairies for some reason. Mary still didn't feel well, and her head was spinning, and she wondered if she was going to die alone in the dark little room. It was a morbid thought for a 5-year-old, but Mary was clever, and she understood something instinctively more than intellectually. For the time being, she was alone until Mommy got back from work. But then again, maybe she could get her here faster because she was sure that Mommy would be very worried about her if she knew there was a scary creature roaming around the house. Maybe the same thing that had happened to Scruffy had happened to Mrs. Van Meer because she had not come back to check on Mary, and neither had she tried to protect Scruffy. Whatever this creature was, Mary hoped it wasn't here when Mommy came back. And that's when she remembered the mobile phone and forced herself to move her tired body and look for it in the neatly packed storage bin at the foot of her mattress. She reached up above her head and pressed the touchlight attached to the wall, and it lit up Mary and the space in a soft yellow glow. She lifted the lid of the bin and saw the phone and its cord right at the top, and quickly removed it and plugged it in. She sighed with relief when a small beep sounded and a red light appeared at the top to let her know it was charging. The sooner she could speak to Mommy, the better, but for now she had to wait a bit for the battery to charge. Fortunately, she had a little fan beside the mattress to keep her cool, so she switched that on too. After finding some dried mango pieces to munch on, Mary leaned back against the wall and did her best not to cry. Not knowing where Mrs. Van Meer or Scruffy were and what that thing was absolutely terrified her. And she wished Mommy back from work as soon as possible. With a bit of luck, when she called the house to check on Mary like she always did and Mrs. Van Meer didn't answer, she might come home sooner to make sure everything was okay. Below the single shelf that had her books on it, Mary reached for what used to be her favorite toy when she was 3, a teddy bear named Roger, and hugged it tightly to her. Finishing the mango and swallowing half a bottle of water, she lay down on her side and was asleep in seconds. The time on the mobile phone told her she'd been asleep for nearly 2 hours. It was hot and stuffy in the hideaway, and her tummy was growling. It needed food, but it would have to wait. The first thing she needed to do was call Mommy and tell her what happened and beg her to come home. Mommy's job was a receptionist for a lawyer's firm in town. It usually took about 4 rings before she answered, but today it just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. "Come on, Mommy, where are you?" She stayed on the phone and saw the ringing tone change to an automated prompt for people to leave a message.
"Sorry I missed your call. Please leave a name, number, and a brief message after the tone."
Then Mary tried again. It was only after the 4th attempt that she decided to stop and have something to eat and drink. She was starting to get worried and did her best not to cry. For reasons she could not explain, she felt like she was the last person on earth, like everyone had suddenly disappeared and left her behind. Mary wiped her mouth and dialed the office again. She had just dialed for the third time when a loud thump sounded through the floor directly beneath her, and she dropped the phone and clamped both hands over her mouth. Her hair clung to her damp face, and sweat made her clothes stick to her body uncomfortably. Just before something scraped the wall right by her head, the markings on the door and walls started glowing again. Mary almost screamed and scurried off the mattress and pushed her back up against the wall. Her eyes were huge and she was panting hard. The wall to Mary's right was next to the landing outside the bedroom. So either there was something on the passage or something had crawled into the walls. Mary tried her very best not to open the door and run. Because what if there were more of those things and one of them was in the bedroom waiting for her? She didn't want what happened to Scruffy happening to her. The scratching noises grew louder and more insistent, and she imagined the thing she'd seen downstairs trying to dig through the wall with its sharp black claws. Her panic escalated and she tried not to cry, but it was becoming more and more difficult. It felt like hours that Mary trembled and shook and wept silent tears before she realized that the noises had stopped and the blue markings had faded. Perhaps the thing had given up, or it couldn't fit through the space between the walls to reach her. Either way, Mary was beyond relieved to hear only silence again. It was wonderful when the cold air wafted over her and dried the sweat on her face, and with her eyes closed, she racked her brain trying to decide what to do next. She didn't know why Mommy wasn't answering the phone and why she wasn't home yet. It could mean that she was on her way and wasn't answering the phone because she was driving. Mommy had said she wasn't allowed to have a phone on at work and could only check it when she went on tea and lunch breaks, which meant that dialing the office was a much better idea. She tried one more time.
Sorry I missed your call. Please leave a name.
And when the
number,
automated
and a brief
message came
after
on,
the tone.
she cancelled the call and let out a big, unsteady sigh. "Please come home, Mummy," she whispered. Mary didn't feel like sleeping again, and at least felt a bit better than she had that morning, but she closed her eyes anyway. Before she could think about anything else, her breathing slowed, and she fell into a deep, deep sleep.